My son sneered at me and said, "You don't even know how to use your own bank account, old man. I'll handle it from now on." His words stripped me of dignity, as if decades of hard work meant nothing. I looked at my old leather ledger, the symbol of my life's discipline. What he didn't know was, the account he stole from wasn't just mine, it was mine to control. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I still remember the smell of fresh coffee at 5 in the morning, the way the kitchen light used to bounce off the linoleum floor as I tied my shoes for another long day at the bank. I wasn't a rich man when I started there, just a young teller who believed in hard work and honesty. Every coin I counted, every signature I verified, it was all part of something bigger. I wanted to build a life where my family never had to worry the way I did growing up. When my son was born, I thought the world had given me a gift I could never repay. I remember holding him in my arms in that tiny hospital room, whispering promises to a baby who couldn't understand a word. "I'll always protect you. I'll always provide." My wife smiled at me, tired but glowing, and said, "He'll know love. That's all a child really needs." She was right, of course. She always had a way of cutting through life to the truth. Our home wasn't fancy, but it was full of warmth. Sunday dinners became sacred in our household: pot roast, mashed potatoes, and always my wife's apple pie. My son used to sit across from me, legs swinging under the table, talking about school and asking me endless questions about money. At first, I thought it was curiosity, maybe even ambition. He wanted to know why some people had more than others, why I always scribbled in that little leather ledger before bed. I'd tell him, "Son, money isn't just numbers. It's trust. It's discipline." He would nod, though I could tell he didn't fully care about the lesson. He wanted the result more than the process. Still, those were the good years. We'd go fishing down at the lake every summer. I'd show him how to bait the hook, how to sit quietly and wait. Patience, I told him, was a man's greatest tool. Sometimes he listened, sometimes he rolled his eyes and said he just wanted to catch the fish, not sit around. I'd laugh it off, ruffle his hair, and think, "He's young, he'll understand one day." My wife. God, I miss her voice. She was the glue of our family. Whenever tempers flared, she'd step in with that soft but firm tone. "Respect each other," she'd say, "because when the day comes that one of us isn't here, you'll wish you had." Back then, I didn't realize how true those words would be. When my granddaughter was born years later, something softened inside me again. She was quiet, observant, and gentle in a way that reminded me of her grandmother. She'd sit on my lap with her picture books while I updated my ledger, her small hand tracing the columns of numbers. Sometimes she'd ask, "Grandpa, why do you write everything down?" I'd smile and say, "So I never forget what matters." She'd giggle and go back to her drawings, but I always wondered if she understood more than she let on. For a long time, life felt steady. I worked hard, provided, saved. I climbed from teller to manager, then eventually into ownership stakes. I didn't tell many people, I didn't need to brag. My satisfaction came from walking into that bank and knowing every brick, every desk, every account had passed through my hands. The ledger wasn't just paper and ink, it was my life story, every sacrifice written line by line. Evenings were the best. I'd come home, my wife humming in the kitchen, my son sprawled on the floor with his schoolbooks. Sometimes I'd help him with math. I remember leaning over his shoulder once, pointing at a problem, when he snapped, "I can do it myself." My wife shot me a look, the kind that said let it go. And I did. Kids want independence. I told myself not to read too much into it. Holidays were full of laughter. Christmas mornings, I'd sit by the tree watching my son tear through wrapping paper, eyes lighting up at the newest toy. I worked overtime some years just to afford those gifts, but it was worth it to see his smile. My wife would remind me, "Don't spoil him too much. He needs to learn gratitude." I'd nod, but secretly I thought, what's the harm in giving him the world? Isn't that what fathers are supposed to do? Looking back now, I see the cracks forming even then. He always wanted more than what was in front of him. When other kids got bicycles, he wanted the newest model. When his friends went to the movies, he wanted the expensive outings, the clothes, the status. I told myself it was just a phase, that he'd grow out of it. But deep down, I think my wife saw what I refused to admit. The day she passed, everything changed. The house felt empty in a way I can't describe. My son was already grown by then, caught up in his own life, his own marriage. My granddaughter was still young, clinging to me at the funeral, whispering, "It's okay, Grandpa." And in that moment, I promised myself I'd hold this family together, no matter how much it hurt. Those good years, they carried me. They gave me something to fight for when the shadows crept in. But even as I smiled through family dinners and birthdays, I could feel the distance growing. Respect, once the bedrock of our home, was slipping away. And though I didn't see it clearly then, the boy I once rocked to sleep, the one I thought I'd given everything to, was beginning to see me not as a father, but as an obstacle. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. Distance creeps in like a draft under the door, you don't notice it until the room is already cold. At first, it was little things. My son stopped answering my calls as quickly. When we did talk, he always seemed distracted, tapping on his phone, eyes darting around like he was waiting for something more important. I'd ask how work was going, and he'd shrug, "Fine, Dad," before steering the conversation toward what I could do for him. It wasn't advice he wanted anymore, it was money. I tried to push those thoughts aside. Parents give. That's what we do. But the tone was changing. One evening, we sat at the dinner table at his house. His wife was serving pasta, and I made a comment about how interest rates were climbing. Old habit, I spent decades watching numbers rise and fall. My son rolled his eyes. "Dad, no one cares about your old banking lectures anymore. Things don't work like they did in your day." The words stung, though he said them casually, almost as if I were a nuisance rather than his father. His wife gave a polite little laugh, but it wasn't kind. It was the laugh of someone who felt superior. I noticed my granddaughter look down at her plate, fiddling with her fork. She didn't say a word, but her silence spoke volumes. I wanted to tell him about the ledger, that I still wrote in it every night, just like I had for 50 years. That numbers don't change, only people's respect for them does. But I swallowed my pride. "You're right," I muttered. "Times are different." The truth was, he'd begun interrupting me more and more. I couldn't finish a sentence without him jumping in, correcting me, or dismissing my story. Once, I was telling his daughter about how her grandmother used to plant roses in the backyard, and he cut me off mid-sentence. "Dad, nobody cares about your gardening stories. She doesn't even remember Grandma." I froze. My granddaughter looked at me with wide eyes, then back at her father. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then stayed quiet. I could see her discomfort, her torn loyalty. I gave her a small smile, trying to ease her, but inside, something twisted. It wasn't just at home. In public too, his tone carried a new edge. At a grocery store one Saturday, I reached for my wallet to pay for a few items, and he stopped me with a smirk. "Put that away, Dad. You're too slow. I'll take care of it." His voice was loud enough for the cashier to hear, and I caught the faintest flicker of pity in her eyes. I felt smaller in that moment than I had in years. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, but the ledger told another story. I'd started noticing withdrawals I didn't remember making, small at first, then larger. Each time, I wrote them down in the ledger, drawing circles around the numbers. The pages were starting to feel less like a history of my life and more like evidence. One night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I opened the ledger and stared at the columns. The numbers were exact, each written in careful ink strokes. My late wife used to tease me for being obsessive about it. "You love that book more than me," she'd laugh. I'd always reply, "No, I love what it stands for. Discipline. Security." Now, as I flipped through the pages, I wondered if I was the only one left who respected what it stood for. The shift wasn't just financial. It was emotional. The phone calls on Father's Day grew shorter. Birthdays became text messages. When I suggested we go fishing again, just like we used to, he chuckled. "Dad, I don't have time to sit around with a stick in the water. That's boring." Boring. That word echoed. To him, patience was boring. To me, it had been the heart of everything. There was one moment that still sticks in my mind. We were all sitting in his living room, the TV buzzing in the background. I tried to tell a story about when I first bought our family home, how proud I felt walking through the door with the keys. Before I could finish, he cut me off. Yeah, times were different back then. Houses cost nothing. You got lucky. Stop acting like you worked magic." I looked at him, really looked at him. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp, but there was something else there too, resentment. Like every sacrifice I had made, every late night at the bank, every extra shift, wasn't proof of love, but a reminder that I had done more than he ever could. The silence after his words was thick. Even his wife shifted uncomfortably, though she didn't defend me. My granddaughter leaned closer to me and whispered, "I like your stories, Grandpa." Just 5 little words, but they kept me from breaking. Still, the respect was gone. The son who once held my hand while crossing the street now looked at me as if I were a burden to be managed. And each time I tried to brush it off, the ledger on my nightstand whispered otherwise. One evening, I sat alone staring at the latest withdrawal circled in red ink. My pen hovered over the page, shaking slightly. For the first time, I wondered if I had raised a son who saw me not as a father, but as a wallet. And then, one morning, I saw a withdrawal from my account I hadn't made, this one larger than all the rest. But when I got home, I couldn't keep the mask on. I sat at my kitchen table, ledger open, pen shaking in my hand. I circled the most recent withdrawal, $7,500 gone in one sweep. My heart pounded. He hadn't lied. He was proud of what he had done. Proud enough to laugh about it in front of others. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the pages, wondering where I had failed as a father. I remembered my wife's warnings, the way she used to say, "Don't let him believe money comes without effort." I thought I had time to teach him. I thought he'd grow into gratitude. Instead, I had raised a man who saw me not as his father, but as an account to be drained. The next morning, I opened my laptop to review the statements online. My hands trembled as I typed in my password. The screen lit up, and there it was, transfer after transfer, all marked with the same destination. My son's name. His hands had been in my pocket for months, and I had been too blind, too trusting, to stop him. And then my heart dropped. He hadn't just made withdrawals. He had full access. I told myself the barbecue was just a bad night, that maybe the drinks had loosened his tongue, that he hadn't meant what he said. But deep down, I knew better. A man doesn't brag about theft unless he feels entitled to it. Still, I wanted to believe I was wrong. I wanted to believe my son still carried some shred of respect for me. That illusion shattered a week later. I had stopped by his house unannounced. It wasn't my habit, but I'd been restless, unable to shake the sight of him grinning while mocking my ledger in front of everyone. I knocked, but no one answered. His car was in the driveway, though, and the front window was cracked open. That's when I heard his voice. "Dad won't last long," he was saying. "Once I'm in charge of everything, we'll be set." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My grip tightened on the railing of the porch. My breath caught. He wasn't talking about helping me. He wasn't even talking about sharing what I'd earned. He was planning his inheritance before I was even gone. His wife's voice floated through the window, sharp and calculating. I told you, you've got to push him. He won't hand it over unless you pressure him. If you don't act soon, what if he leaves it to someone else? Someone else. The thought clearly frightened her. It frightened me, too, but for different reasons. My late wife had always warned me, don't let entitlement grow. It's a seed that chokes out gratitude. She had seen something in him I hadn't wanted to admit. Relax, my son said, chuckling. I've got access now. He doesn't even know it. He still scribbles in that stupid ledger every night like it means something. By the time he realizes, it'll all be ours. Our. Not his. Not mine. Ours. Him and his wife, sitting in that living room, already dividing up the spoils of a man who wasn't even dead yet. I staggered back from the porch, heart hammering in my chest. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The ledger in my hand trembled, the ink smudging where my thumb pressed against the cover. That book had been my anchor for decades, and now it was the very thing he mocked while plotting behind my back. I didn't knock. I didn't confront him. I walked back to my car and sat there in silence, staring at the steering wheel, replaying his words over and over. Dad won't last long. He wasn't waiting for me to pass naturally. He was waiting for me to be out of the way. On the drive home, memories of my wife came flooding back, her laugh, the way she always smoothed out tension in the house. I could almost hear her voice in the passenger seat, calm and firm, you've given him too much. Now he thinks he deserves everything. Tears burned in my eyes. I had thought love was enough. That providing, sacrificing, always putting him first would earn respect in return. Instead, I had created a man who saw me as an obstacle, a door to kick down. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, ledger open before me. The lamp cast a yellow glow on the pages, highlighting every circled withdrawal, every note I had scribbled in frustration. My pen hovered above the paper, but I couldn't write. My hand shook too much. Instead, I stared at the old entries from years ago. Tiny notations about groceries, utility bills, the mortgage payment. Then, later pages, tuition checks, braces, sports gear. Every line was a story of sacrifice. And now, the later pages were marred with theft, betrayal written in numbers. I pressed my palm against the page and whispered to the empty room, Marjorie, what do I do? Of course, no answer came. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own uneven breathing. In the days that followed, I noticed more than I had before. His calls came only when he wanted something. He avoided looking me in the eye when we were in the same room. His wife was always pushing conversations toward money, houses, cars, investments. My granddaughter stayed quiet, as if she sensed the storm brewing, her eyes often flicking between her parents and me. The betrayal wasn't just the money. It was the scheme. The whispers behind my back, the assumption that I was already half gone, the way they looked at me as if I were a vault waiting to be cracked. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like part of my family. I felt like prey. And something inside me shifted. I didn't lash out. I didn't confront him in anger. I grew quiet. Observant. Calculating in a way I hadn't been in years. Every word, every glance, every slip of the tongue, they became pieces of a puzzle I was determined to solve. Because if he thought I was powerless, he was wrong. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought I was just an old man with a dusty ledger, too weak to fight back. He didn't know that ledger wasn't just habit, it was proof. It was history. And it was going to be my weapon. He thought he was in control. But the truth was, he had no idea who really owned his playground. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I held my silence for days after overhearing that conversation through his window. The words replayed in my head like a broken record: Dad won't last long, once I'm in charge, we'll be set. Every night, I sat at my table, ledger open, circling transactions until the ink bled through the paper. But one morning, I knew I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I didn't storm over in anger. No, that would have been easy for him to dismiss as the rantings of an old man. Instead, I called him and said calmly, "I'd like to come by. Just to talk." He sighed, long and impatient. "Fine, Dad. But make it quick. We're busy." When I arrived at his house, his wife was sprawled on the couch scrolling through her phone, her expression cool and detached. My son leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, a smirk already tugging at his lips. "What's this about?" he asked, like he was addressing a nuisance salesman at the door. I held up the ledger. "Why didn't you just ask me?" He frowned. "Ask you what?" "For the money. For help. For anything. Instead, you took. You transferred funds without my knowledge." My voice didn't rise. If anything, it grew quieter, steadier, forcing him to lean in to hear me. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, Dad. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I was just moving things around. You've got plenty. And let's be honest, you'd say no if I asked. This way, nobody gets hurt." "Nobody gets hurt?" I repeated, my fingers gripping the ledger tighter. "You've hurt me more than you realize." His wife leaned forward, resting her chin on her palm, smirking. "You should be grateful, really. At least he's keeping it in the family. You're lucky we're keeping you around." Those words, "keeping me around," sent a chill through me. They weren't even pretending anymore. I wasn't a father in their eyes. I was an obstacle to manage until I was gone. I stood there in silence, studying their faces. The arrogance, the entitlement, the absolute absence of shame. For a moment, I felt a familiar heat rising in my chest, the urge to shout, to remind him of every sleepless night, every sacrifice I had made. But I didn't. Instead, I closed the ledger gently, slid it under my arm, and said, "Thank you for your honesty." He blinked, caught off guard. "That's it?" "That's it," I said, turning toward the door. As I stepped outside, I caught sight of my neighbor, Mrs. Parker, tending to her flowers next door. She looked up, waved, and then frowned when she saw my face. "You all right?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then forced a small smile. "Just a family matter." She pursed her lips, shaking her head. "Family shouldn't make you look that way. You don't deserve that." Her words landed heavier than she knew. They reminded me that someone still saw me, still believed I had dignity worth defending. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again. I didn't cry, though the weight in my chest pressed hard. I didn't rage, though the anger was sharp. Instead, I opened the ledger, smoothed the pages, and looked at the long list of circled withdrawals. Each one was a betrayal, but together they were a map. A record. A weapon. For the first time in months, my hand stopped shaking as I wrote. I wasn't documenting loss anymore, I was preparing for battle. My son thought he was clever. He thought his smirk and his dismissive tone made him untouchable. But he had slipped. In his arrogance, he had revealed the truth: he didn't see me as a father. He saw me as a wallet with a heartbeat. And that knowledge freed me. Because when a man has nothing left to lose, not respect, not trust, not love, he has everything to gain by fighting back. The next morning, I dressed in my best suit. The same one I wore to my wife's funeral. The fabric was stiff, the collar snug against my neck, but it made me feel steady, armored. I tucked the ledger under my arm and walked out the door. The streets were quiet as I drove downtown, but inside me, something stirred, a calm, focused resolve I hadn't felt since the days I negotiated loans at the bank. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to act. When I walked into my lawyer's office, he looked up in surprise. "Well, I'll be," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Haven't seen you in months. What brings you in?" I set the ledger down on his desk, my palm resting on the worn leather cover. My voice was calm, almost cold. "I need to make some changes." He adjusted his glasses, studying me. "To your estate?" I nodded. "To everything." The lawyer's office smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. I'd been there many times over the years, usually for routine matters, renewing documents, updating minor clauses, making sure everything was in order. But this time, the air felt heavier. This wasn't maintenance. This was severance. I slid the ledger across his desk. He adjusted his glasses and flipped through the pages. His eyebrows rose as he scanned the circled withdrawals, the neat notes in the margins. "You've kept meticulous records," he said quietly. I nodded. "Every penny, every transfer. All his. He's been draining me little by little, like a thief in the night. Except he doesn't think it's theft. He thinks it's his right." The lawyer leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "And you want to make changes to your will?" "I don't want to," I said, my voice low. "But I have to." For a long moment, silence filled the room. I thought of my wife, her gentle laugh, her steady eyes when she warned me not to spoil our boy too much. She had been right, and now here I was, sitting in this office, about to undo decades of plans we'd made together. "I want him removed," I said finally. The words tasted like ash. "Completely?" "Yes. Everything I own, every asset, every account, is to bypass him. If he tries to contest, I want a clause that strips him of everything. I'd rather it all go to charity than let him touch another cent." The lawyer tapped his pen against his notepad, studying me carefully. "That's a hard line, you understand. Once it's written, there's no gray area. No reconciliation unless you rewrite it later." "I understand," I said. "He's already written his intentions in my ledger, every cruel word, every withdrawal, every plan behind my back. He's waiting for me to die. If I give him what he wants, I might as well sign my death certificate today." The lawyer nodded slowly, then began typing. The clack of the keys echoed in the quiet office, each stroke carving my decision into permanence. As he worked, my eyes wandered to the bookshelf by the window. Law volumes lined up neatly, spines stiff with authority. Among them, a framed picture of his grandchildren. I thought of mine, of my granddaughter's shy smile, the way she whispered, "I like your stories, Grandpa," when her father tried to silence me. She was the only light in this storm, the only reminder that family could still mean loyalty. "Here we are," the lawyer said, sliding the draft toward me. He explained the clauses: assets to be divided among charities, educational funds, community programs. A special clause for my granddaughter, ensuring she would have something set aside for her future. And the ironclad condition: if my son contested, everything would go to charity, not even a dime for him. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, far heavier than any pen should. My fingers trembled as I hovered over the signature line. My mind filled with images: my son as a boy, holding my hand while crossing the street, his face lighting up when I surprised him with a baseball glove, the pride in his eyes when he caught his first fish. Then the more recent memories crashed over them: his mocking laughter at the barbecue, his voice sneering through the window, his wife's smirk as she said I should be grateful they were keeping me around. My hand steadied. I signed. The lawyer stamped the papers, sealing them with an official weight that felt both brutal and final. When he slid the folder back to me, I placed my ledger on top of it, the two bound together in a kind of justice. As I stood to leave, the lawyer touched my arm gently. I've seen families torn apart by greed, he said. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But you're one of the few who has the strength to act before it destroys you completely. I nodded, unable to find words. My throat was thick with unspoken grief. Outside, the sun was bright, almost mocking in its warmth. I sat in my car for a long while, staring at the folder on the passenger seat. I had done what needed to be done, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like mourning. I whispered into the silence, "Marjorie, I hope I've done the right thing." Driving home, I felt the strangest mix of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the boy I once knew, the son I thought I had raised with love and discipline. Relief that I had finally taken back control, that his scheming hands would never again reach into my pockets unchecked. That night, I placed the ledger and the folder side by side on the kitchen table. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to sleep. Not peacefully, but without the constant churn of helplessness. But fate wasn't done testing me yet. Because just when I thought I had secured the walls around me, my son was about to cross one final line, one that would push everything past the point of no return. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. I had just returned from church, the hymn still lingering in my ears, when my phone buzzed. It was my son. His voice was clipped, impatient. "Dad, we need to talk. Come over." I hesitated, but something in his tone told me I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my ledger, habit, instinct, and drove to his house. When I stepped inside, the atmosphere was thick, suffocating. His wife stood with her arms folded, lips pursed, eyes cold. My son didn't even offer me a seat. He stood tall in the living room, shoulders squared, like a man ready to dictate terms. "We've been talking," he said flatly. "And we've come to a decision." I raised an eyebrow, clutching the ledger tighter. "A decision about what?" He exchanged a glance with his wife before speaking. "It's time you stopped living alone. It's not safe. You're getting older, forgetful. We think it's best if you move into a care facility. A nursing home." The words landed like blows. My knees weakened, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there on the rug. "A nursing home?" I repeated, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Yes," his wife chimed in. "It's what's best. You'll have people looking after you, meals prepared, everything handled. You won't have to worry about bills or money anymore." I stared at her, my chest tightening. Bills or money? Is that what this is about? My son's mask slipped then, arrogance seeping through. "Look, Dad, you're sitting on assets you don't even use. The house, the accounts, you're hoarding it. You should sign the house over to me before you go. That way, everything's easier." Easier. For him. The betrayal cut deeper than ever. It wasn't about my safety. It was about control. He didn't want me cared for, he wanted me out of the way. I swallowed hard, the taste of bitterness coating my tongue. "Your mother would be ashamed of you," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. He didn't like hearing about her, the woman who would have seen right through him. "Don't guilt-trip me, Dad. This is for everyone's good. The sooner you accept it, the smoother it'll be." My hand trembled, but not from weakness, from fury I fought to keep contained. I opened the ledger, flipping to the most recent pages. "Do you see this?" I asked, holding it up. "Every withdrawal you've made, every theft, every lie, it's all here." He scoffed. "That old book doesn't mean anything. Nobody cares about your scribbles." But I cared. And soon, so would others. I closed the ledger with a snap and tucked it under my arm. "If you think you can push me into a home and take what I've built, you're wrong." His wife rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. What are you going to do? Sue your own son? Go to the police? You'll look pathetic." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Their arrogance spoke louder than any words could. I turned toward the door, but before I left, I looked back at my son, my boy who once begged me to teach him how to ride a bike, who once cried when he skinned his knee, who once promised he'd always make me proud. "You've made your decision," I said quietly. "Now I'll make mine." The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house my wife and I had built together, the place where we raised our children, where we laughed, argued, cried, and celebrated. The thought of giving it up, signing it over to a son who saw me as a burden, was unthinkable. Inside, I placed the ledger on the table and pulled out a folder. I began gathering every document I had, bank statements, legal papers, the updated will my lawyer had stamped only days earlier. Piece by piece, I stacked them into a file, my weapon for the battle ahead. The exhaustion hit me in waves. My heart ached, not just from betrayal but from the finality of it all. I knew then that whatever bond one once had with my son was gone. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a rough patch. This was war. And I was done playing defense. For years, I'd been quiet, patient, forgiving. But patience had turned to silence, and silence had turned into their weapon. They thought I was too old, too weak, too naive to fight back. They thought I'd roll over, sign my name, and vanish into some sterile room in a nursing facility. They were wrong. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I sat calmly at the kitchen table, folder by my side, ledger in front of me. I traced the lines of ink, the careful numbers, the neat handwriting that had carried me through decades of sacrifice. My wife's voice echoed in my mind, "Respect each other. When the day comes that one of us isn't here, you'll wish you had." My son would wish. But by then, it would be too late. I slid the documents into my bag, buttoned it closed, and set it by the door. Tomorrow, there would be no more hiding. Tomorrow, the truth would come out in front of everyone. Because the next battlefield wouldn't be his living room. It would be the one place he least expected, his sister's wedding. Weddings are supposed to be joyous. They're meant to be filled with music, dancing, clinking glasses, and laughter echoing into the night. But as I stood outside the reception hall, folder under one arm and my ledger tucked firmly against my chest, my stomach churned. This wasn't going to be a celebration for me. It was going to be Judgment Day. I hadn't been invited. My daughter had said it was best to keep things small, but I knew the truth. My son didn't want me there. He feared I might embarrass him, might remind people that he was still tethered to a father he wanted erased. But I walked in anyway. The doors opened to a flood of light and music. People were laughing, glasses raised, the bride radiant in her white dress. For a moment, I hesitated, the weight of what I carried pressing hard on my shoulders. Then I stepped forward. Heads turned, whispers stirred, and the music seemed to dim though the band kept playing. My son's face was the first I saw. He froze mid-laugh, his glass of champagne hovering in the air. His wife's eyes narrowed instantly, suspicion flashing. I walked calmly to the center of the room, placed the folder on the nearest table, and opened my ledger. The pages fluttered like wings, covered in years of careful ink. "I won't take much of your time," I said, my voice steady but carrying through the room. "But there are truths here that need to be spoken, truths I can no longer allow to be hidden." A hush spread over the crowd. My son strode forward, anger radiating off him. "Dad, what are you doing? Sit down before you make a fool of yourself." I looked him square in the eye. "No. Not this time." I held up a page from the ledger, circled numbers glowing under the bright chandeliers. Every withdrawal, every transfer, every theft. My son has been draining my accounts, mocking me behind my back, and planning my inheritance before I'm even gone. Gasps rippled through the room. A murmur of disbelief, then silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. My son's face reddened. That's ridiculous. He's old, confused. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I opened the folder and pulled out the bank statements, the legal documents, the updated will. I laid them out on the table for all to see. These aren't the scribbles of an old man. These are facts. Records. Proof. He thought I was weak, but what he didn't know is that I am still the majority shareholder of the very bank he stole from. The crowd erupted in whispers. People leaned in to look, some covering their mouths in shock. A cousin muttered, "Oh my God," someone else whispered, "He really did that to his own father?" My son lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers, but I pulled them back and raised my voice. "From this moment forward, you are cut off. No more access. No more chances. You will not inherit a dime from me. If you contest it, every cent will go to charity." The bride's smile had faded into horror. My daughter, his sister, covered her face with her hands, tears slipping through her fingers. My granddaughter stood frozen near the back, her small fists clenched at her sides. His wife hissed, "You can't do this. Everyone here knows you're unstable. Nobody will believe you." I looked around the room. Dozens of faces stared back at me, not with pity, but with quiet solidarity. They believed. They saw the truth in the numbers, the cold arrogance in my son's eyes, the tremor in my voice that wasn't weakness but pain. I closed the ledger gently, holding it against my chest like a shield. "You should have respected me. You should have honored your mother's memory. Instead, you mocked me, stole from me, and plotted against me. That ends today." My son stood trembling, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. But he said nothing. For the first time, he had no words. The silence that followed was deafening. The band had stopped playing, the laughter gone. Only the sound of my heartbeat filled my ears. I turned, picked up my folder, and walked out of the hall without looking back. No one stopped me. No one tried to soften the blow. When I stepped into the night air, the cool breeze hit my face, and for a moment I felt lighter. I had spoken the truth. I had taken back my dignity. But as I drove home, the silence in the car pressed hard against me. The confrontation was over. The truth was out. But when I unlocked my front door and stepped into the stillness of my empty house, I realized something I hadn't anticipated: victory can be lonelier than defeat. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to silence. Not the soft, peaceful kind of silence you feel on a Sunday morning, but a heavy, suffocating one. The kind that makes the walls press in. My phone didn't ring. No text messages. No emails from family. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the old house as it settled on its foundations. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. The ledger lay open in front of me, pages still marked with circles and underlines. For weeks, I had been writing in it with a shaking hand. But that morning, I didn't write. I just stared at it, wondering whether exposing the truth had given me justice, or just carved me deeper into loneliness. By noon, I had my answer. I drove into town for groceries. The moment I stepped through the doors of the local market, I felt the eyes. Conversations quieted when I passed. Heads turned. A few people offered polite nods, but most just whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. Two men by the produce section didn't lower their voices enough. "Did you hear about what he did at the wedding?" "Yeah. Cut off his own son. Can you imagine? Maybe the son had it coming. Maybe. Still, that's cold. Cold." That word stung, though I didn't flinch. I just kept walking, pushing the cart down the aisle, listening to the echo of my shoes against the tile. At the checkout, the cashier, a young girl with kind eyes, paused as she scanned my items. "I just want to say," she murmured, my grandpa, he went through something similar. People didn't understand, but he wasn't wrong either. Sometimes, you've got to protect yourself. I managed a smile, small but genuine. Thank you, I said softly. Back home, I unpacked the groceries slowly, each can and box clinking against the counter. The house was too quiet. I found myself speaking out loud, as if my wife were still there. They'll twist it, Marjorie. They'll make me the villain. My voice cracked, the words bouncing back from empty walls. In the days that followed, the gossip spread. Some called me brave. Others said I was bitter. A few hinted that maybe age had clouded my judgment. I didn't defend myself. I let them talk. The truth was in my ledger, in the papers, in my heart. And those who mattered would see it. To clear my head, I began walking each evening along the wooded path behind my house. The crunch of leaves under my shoes, the wind whistling through the branches, it gave me space to breathe. I thought of my wife on those walks, of how she'd hold my arm when we strolled through the park. I whispered to her sometimes, telling her what had happened, asking her what she thought. The trees didn't answer, but the silence was easier to bear than the stares in town. One afternoon, as I trimmed the hedges in the yard, Mrs. Parker from next door called out. You gave them a show, didn't you? She said, half smiling as she leaned on her rake. I chuckled dryly. I didn't mean to give a show. Just the truth. She nodded. Truth's never quiet, not when people don't want to hear it. But you did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you different. Her words soothed something in me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was validation. Sometimes that's all an old man needs, to know he isn't crazy, that the world hasn't turned upside down without him noticing. Still, the nights were the hardest. The house creaked and groaned, every sound amplified by loneliness. I sat by the window with the ledger in my lap, thumbing through pages filled with sacrifice and betrayal. For the first time, I wondered what would happen to the ledger when I was gone. Would it sit on a shelf collecting dust, or would it mean something to someone else? One night, I closed the ledger and set it aside. Instead, I picked up a pen and a blank sheet of paper. My hand hovered for a long time before I finally wrote, Marjorie's house. Just 2 words, but they felt like the beginning of something new. It wasn't enough to cut him off. It wasn't enough to protect what I had. I needed to give it purpose, to ensure that what my wife and I built together would live on in a way that honored her name, not his greed. The silence of my home was still heavy, but for the first time, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of a plan. And with that pen stroke, I realized, this battle wasn't just about what I'd lost. It was about what I still had the power to create. The name I scribbled on that blank page, Marjorie's house, wouldn't leave my mind. I wrote it late at night, the pen scratching against paper in the dim glow of a lamp, and when I went to bed, the words echoed in my dreams. By morning, I knew it wasn't just an idea. It was a calling. For too long, my life had been defined by what I gave to people who didn't respect it. I had built, saved, sacrificed, all so that my family could live comfortably. And what did it leave me with? A son who mocked me, who plotted behind my back, who saw my worth measured only in dollars. But maybe my mistake was thinking legacy had to run through blood. I started small. I picked up the phone and called an old colleague from the bank, John, a man I'd once mentored when he was fresh out of college. He had gone on to become a respected financial advisor. John, I said, my voice steady though my heart raced. I want to create something. A foundation. Maybe a community center. A place named after my late wife. I need guidance. There was a pause on the other end, then his warm voice, you've still got fight in you, don't you? Tell me more. For the next hour, we talked about logistics, nonprofits, endowments, charitable trusts. John's excitement grew with every detail. This isn't just doable, he said. It could be life-changing for people. Let's get the paperwork started. After hanging up, I felt lighter than I had in months. For once, my energy wasn't going into defending myself, it was going into building something. The next day, I pulled boxes down from the attic. Old furniture, photo albums, knickknacks, all the clutter of decades. Piece by piece, I sorted through it, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to repurpose. My house wasn't going to be just a monument to my past. It was going to be the heartbeat of something new. As I worked, I kept the ledger close. I began writing new entries, not withdrawals or betrayals, but plans. Estimates for repairs. Costs for renovations. Notes about which rooms could be turned into study spaces, which corners could be reading nooks, which halls could hold community meetings. The same book that once carried my pain was slowly becoming a blueprint for hope. Neighbors noticed the change. One afternoon, Mrs. Parker leaned over the fence as I painted the front porch railings. "Looks like you're fixing the place up," she said with a curious smile. "I am," I replied, brush in hand. "This house is going to mean something again. Not just for me, for everyone." She tilted her head. "You're turning it into a project?" "A project," I said, smiling faintly. "A promise." Word spread quicker than I expected. Within a week, an old veteran I used to see at the diner stopped by. "Heard you're starting something," he said. "Need a hand with repairs?" His eyes carried a respect I hadn't seen in a long time. Soon after, a retired schoolteacher dropped off boxes of books. "For the library you'll build," she said simply. Even the mailman left a note in my mailbox: "If you need volunteers, count me in." It was as if the community had been waiting for a cause, and all I had to do was open the door. Each evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my ledger and the growing stack of papers John had sent me, incorporation forms, bylaws, funding options. It was exhausting, yes, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. Not the weight of betrayal, but the satisfying ache of creation. Still, the house echoed with silence at night. As much as the plan filled me with purpose, I couldn't shake the absence of family. I longed to hear my wife's voice cheering me on, to see my granddaughter's smile lighting up the room. The silence pressed heavy, even as the vision grew stronger. One evening, I walked through the half-empty living room, imagining it filled with people. Children bent over homework at sturdy desks. Veterans gathered in armchairs swapping stories. Neighbors cooking meals together in the kitchen. Laughter, warmth, respect, the very things my own bloodline had denied me. I stopped in front of the mantel where my wife's photograph sat in its silver frame. I touched the glass gently. "We'll call it your house, Marjorie," I whispered. "You'll be remembered for love, not for greed." For the first time since she passed, I felt as if I could hear her answer in the quiet: "That's exactly what I wanted." The next morning, I woke to a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I froze. Standing there, clutching a school bag against her chest, was my granddaughter. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with dried tears. She looked up at me, voice trembling. "Grandpa," she whispered. "Can I come in?" When my granddaughter stepped into the house, she looked so small standing in the doorway, her backpack slipping off one shoulder. I guided her inside gently, setting her bag on the chair. For a long moment, she just stood there, twisting her hands together, as if she didn't know what to say. Finally, she blurted out, "I'm not like them, Grandpa. I don't care about money. I just miss you." Those words cracked something in me. I pulled her into my arms, and she clung to me tightly, her face pressed against my chest. I hadn't realized how much I needed that hug until that very moment. We sat at the kitchen table, the ledger open beside us. She glanced at it, then at me. "Dad says you're obsessed with this book," she whispered. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. It's not an obsession. It's a story. Every line, every number, it's my life. Our family's life. I wrote it so I'd never forget what matters. Her eyes lingered on the ink-stained pages. Can I write something in it? I hesitated, then slid the book toward her. She took my pen and, in neat little letters, wrote, "I believe you, Grandpa." My throat tightened, tears blurring my vision. That single sentence meant more than any inheritance, any legacy. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. In the days that followed, she came by often. Sometimes after school, sometimes on weekends. She helped me sort through boxes in the attic, laughing at the old photos, asking questions about her grandmother. What was she like? She asked one afternoon, her eyes wide with curiosity. I smiled, remembering. She was gentle, but strong. She could silence a room with just a look, not because she was angry, but because people respected her. She always said family isn't about blood, it's about how you treat each other. My granddaughter nodded thoughtfully. Then I want to be like her. Her presence breathed new life into the house. And it wasn't just her. Word of Marjorie's house spread, and soon neighbors began stopping by to offer help. One evening, a group of veterans showed up with toolboxes. "We heard you're fixing this place up," one of them said. "We've got strong hands and time to spare." They spent hours repairing the porch steps, replacing old light fixtures, tightening creaky hinges. Their laughter filled the air, rough but warm, like a chorus of resilience. Another day, the retired schoolteacher returned with more boxes of books. "You'll need shelves," she said. "I'll organize a group to build them." And she did. Within a week, the living room walls were lined with sturdy wooden shelves, each one filling with stories waiting to be read. Even the children in the neighborhood pitched in, painting signs and planting flowers in the yard. One little boy, no older than 8, tugged at my sleeve and said, "My mom says you're making a place where we can all belong." "That's cool." I smiled and patted his head. "That's exactly what we're doing." The house, once heavy with loneliness, buzzed with energy. Every hammer strike, every laugh, every gesture of kindness reminded me that real family wasn't bound by blood, it was built through loyalty, respect, and shared purpose. Of course, not everyone was supportive. My son kept his distance, but I knew he was watching. I saw his car parked at the corner once, engine idling, his eyes fixed on the house filled with people who weren't him. He never stepped out, never said a word, but the bitterness on his face was clear even from a distance. Let him watch. Let him see what real love looks like. One evening, after everyone had left, my granddaughter and I sat in the living room, the shelves now full of books, the air smelling faintly of fresh paint. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I think this house feels happy again." I kissed the top of her head. "That's because you're here. You and everyone else who cares." The ledger sat on the coffee table, open to her little note, "I believe you, Grandpa." I ran my fingers over the ink, feeling strength where once there had only been weakness. For the first time, I didn't feel like a man abandoned by his family. I felt like a man who had finally found it. But peace never lasts forever. One gray afternoon, as the sky threatened rain, there was a knock at the door. My granddaughter had just left for school, the house quiet again. I opened the door, and there he was, my son. Alone. No wife, no smirk, no sunglasses perched arrogantly on his head. Just him, his face thinner, his eyes tired, his pride seemingly broken. "Dad," he said quietly. I need to talk." For a long moment, I just stood there in the doorway, staring at him. My son looked nothing like the man who once sneered at me across a barbecue, or the one who mocked my ledger in front of a crowd. His shoulders sagged, his eyes hollowed with exhaustion. Even his voice, when he finally spoke again, carried none of that sharp arrogance. "Dad," he said, barely above a whisper, "I don't know where else to go." I stepped aside slowly. "Come in." He walked into the house, his gaze flicking nervously over the walls, the freshly painted trim, the bookshelves lining the living room. I could tell he noticed the life buzzing in this house now, even in its quiet moments. It was no longer just mine, it belonged to the community, to my granddaughter, to everyone who had helped rebuild it. He sank into a chair at the kitchen table, rubbing his hands together. "I've lost everything," he admitted. "The house, the car, even her." "Your wife?" I asked. He nodded, bitter laughter escaping his lips. "She left the moment the money dried up. Took what little we had left and walked out the door." I studied him for a long while. This was the man who once laughed in my face, who told me I should be grateful he was keeping me around. Now he was just a shadow of himself, stripped of all the things he thought gave him power. He looked up, his eyes glistening. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know I was cruel. I know I stole from you. I thought I was entitled. I thought I deserved it because you always took care of me. But now the bank won't even give me a loan. They won't touch me." His voice cracked. I never thought I'd be the one shut out. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same bank he had stolen from, the same accounts he had drained, the same legacy he mocked, it was now the wall he couldn't climb. Justice, in its own quiet way, had caught up to him. I leaned back, folding my arms. "And what do you want from me?" His voice broke. "Not money. I swear, I don't want money. I need your forgiveness. I can't carry this anymore. Please, Dad." The silence that followed was heavier than any courtroom, louder than any wedding confrontation. My ledger sat on the table between us, its pages filled with decades of sacrifice and months of betrayal. My granddaughter's note, "I believe you, Grandpa," peeked out from the corner of the open page. I thought of my wife. What would she say? She always believed in forgiveness, but she also believed in accountability. "Respect each other," she used to say. "Because when the day comes that one of us isn't here, you'll wish you had." And here it was, that day. I studied my son, trying to reconcile the broken man in front of me with the boy I once taught to fish, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, the boy I promised to protect. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted, my voice low but firm. "You didn't just take money from me, you took respect. You mocked everything I stood for. And you did it with no shame until the world turned against you." He dropped his head, tears slipping down his face. "I know. And I don't deserve it. But you're all I have left." I closed the ledger slowly, pressing my palm against the worn leather cover. My answer sat heavy in my chest, weighing more than any number I had ever written down. This wasn't about accounts or inheritance anymore. This was about dignity, about love, about what kind of man I wanted to be in the time I had left. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I finally spoke. "Maybe forgiveness is possible, but it won't come cheap. It will take years of respect, years of rebuilding trust, years of proving you care about more than yourself. If you're ready for that, maybe one day. But until then, you'll have to live with the choices you made." He nodded, his shoulders shaking. "I'll try, Dad. I'll try." And as I watched him sit there, broken, humbled, I realized my answer would shape the rest of my days, and his. Would you forgive your child after such betrayal? Tell us in the comments. The lawn is striped with morning sunlight and folding chairs. A red ribbon stretches across the porch I painted with my own hands. Microphones bloom like black flowers on a plywood podium, and my heart thumps steady behind the lapel of my best suit. By 10 o'clock, the front yard is a small town of faces. Neighbors stand shoulder to shoulder with veterans in their service caps, teachers with clipboards, kids clutching paper programs that still smell like ink. A cameraman from the local TV station checks his focus. The editor from the weekly paper lifts her pen. Mrs. Parker waves me toward the steps, her smile trembling like mine. My granddaughter stands at my side, fingers looped through the crook of my arm. She's dressed in a simple blue dress her mother would have loved, hair pulled back, eyes clear. She leans close and whispers, "You ready, Grandpa?" "As I'll ever be," I murmur, and feel the old courage return, the kind that carried me through long nights at the bank counting and recounting until the numbers kissed the ledger's margin. Someone taps the microphone. "Good morning," the mayor says, grin bright, tie slightly crooked. "Today we dedicate a home and a promise, Marjorie's house, part community center, part study hall, part shelter for anyone who needs a steady porch light." He gestures to me. "And we honor the man who made it happen." Applause lifts across the yard. It isn't thunderous. It's warm, like hands around a mug on a cold day. I step to the microphone and steady my breath. My ledger is under my arm, the leather soft from decades of work and worry. I lay it gently on the podium so the spine faces the crowd. For a second, the sunlight lands on it just right, and the old scuffs look like a shoreline. "Thank you," I begin, my voice stronger than I expected. "This house has been many things. It was the place my wife, Marjorie, taught me what respect looks like in the small hours, labeling leftovers, listening before speaking, tucking bills into envelopes even when we were tired. Today, it becomes something else again. I look out and find familiar faces, the retired schoolteacher who built our first shelves, the veteran who replaced the porch steps with a patient, exacting pride, the cashier who offered kind words when town gossip ran faster than the facts. I nod to each in turn. "You did this with me." A reporter raises a hand. "Why now?" she asks. "And why a center instead of leaving it in the family?" A murmur ripples. I let it pass through me. My granddaughter's hand tightens on my sleeve, a small anchor. "Because family," I say, "isn't a deed or a bloodline. It's a way of treating each other." I spent a lifetime writing numbers in this ledger, making sure every cent had a home. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that the ledger's true work was to teach, not to control. This place will do that better than I ever could alone. I don't say my son's name. I don't need to. Truth doesn't always require a spotlight. Sometimes it's the steady light over the doorway that tells you where to turn in a storm. The mayor claps me on the back and turns me toward the ribbon. My granddaughter takes the scissors, then pauses. "You should do it, Grandpa." "We'll do it together," I whisper. Our hands overlap on the metal, and we cut. The ribbon parts with a clean, polite sound, and the crowd cheers. Inside, the house hums with new purpose. The front room is now a library, shelves along the walls, a long table rescued from a school auction, lamps with warm shades pooling light like honey. In the dining room, a corkboard lists after-school tutoring hours, veterans' coffee mornings, and a flyer about a scholarship fund seeded by my first donation and matched by a few quiet friends from the bank who remembered what we built together. The kitchen smells of cinnamon, someone brought pies in Marjorie's honor, and the back hallway holds a row of hooks labeled with kids' names in blue marker. I give a small tour for the press. The cameraman follows, the microphone hovers. "This room," I say, stepping into what used to be our den, "will be for job searches and resumes. The bank taught me numbers, but the lobby taught me listening. Folks don't always need cash. Sometimes they need a chair, a form, a witness." An older veteran in a jacket dotted with pins raises his paper cup. "To Marjorie," he toasts, voice rough with warmth. Others echo him, and for a moment the house fills with her name. It lands soft and right. On the mantel is her silver picture frame. I catch my reflection in the glass, older, yes, but steadier. I think of that morning at the wedding hall when my hands shook, not from age, but from the cost of truth. Today they don't shake. Today they build. Across the room, near the threshold, I notice a figure hovering outside the stream of guests. He keeps to the edge, not stepping past the entryway. My son. His suit is clean but tired, like a man who slept in it, pressed it under books, worn apology into the seams. Our eyes meet. He swallows and nods once. I return the nod. Nothing more. The house isn't a stage for punishment, and I won't make it one. He stays in the doorway, a visitor to something he cannot yet enter, and for now that's where the boundary belongs. Speech, someone calls. Laughter tinkles, nudging, and I lift my hands as if catching a fly ball. Just a few more words, I say. I turn the ledger toward me and open it. The middle pages are crowded with notations, mortgage numbers, braces paid for in 4 installments, the tiny check mark I made the day my wife rang the final bell on her last round of chemo. Then the sections I never thought I'd write, circles around withdrawals, the red ink of disbelief, the moment I stopped documenting loss and started planning a way forward. I flip to the newest page. The handwriting is slower now but certain. Marjorie's house, operating budget, scholarship disbursement calendar, veterans coffee fund, pantry receipts. Beneath that, in smaller letters, a line my granddaughter added this morning when she thought I wasn't looking: respect is interest, compounded daily. Once, I say, eyes still on the page, this book taught me to account for what we had. Now it reminds me to account for who we are. The balance sheet I care about most can't be reconciled in dollars. It's measured in chairs filled, homework finished, hands washed after dish duty, names remembered at the front door. The room quiets into a good silence, the listening kind. I close the ledger gently and rest my palm on the cover. If you ever feel like your story has been reduced to what someone took from you, come here. We'll help you write what you give next. After the formalities, people drift into conversations. A little boy reads on the floor with his shoes kicked off. A veteran laughs so hard he coughs, then waves off the concern with a grin. The retired teacher organizes a list for Saturday volunteers. My granddaughter moves through it all, offering cups of water, guiding a new family to the pantry, answering questions like a hostess who has always lived here. In a way, she has. She's the first one who wrote belief into the ledger. The TV reporter asks for one last shot: would I mind standing by the mantel with the book? I nod. The camera light blinks red, the boom mic hovers. Final thought, she prompts. I look past the lens to the doorway where my son still lingers, then back to the room full of people who chose to be here. I used to think legacy was what you left to your family, I say. Now I know legacy is what you leave in your family, blood or not. I let the words land. Welcome to Marjorie's house. When the cameras pack up and the crowd thins to a warm buzz, I step to the mantel. The silver frame is cool under my fingers. I lift the ledger, feel its familiar weight, the weight of paychecks and pie recipes and tuition checks and handwritten apologies and fresh budgets and a child's simple faith. I set it down beside Marjorie's photograph, slide it so the spine runs parallel to her smile, and rest my hand on it one last time. Thank you, I whisper to the woman who kept me honest, and to the book that kept me diligent. Then I close the ledger. Not in anger. Not to hide it. To mark the moment a house became a home again, and a man finally counted what mattered most.